This is ANN News.
I am Olajumoke Olatunji. The Coalition of United Political Parties, CUPP, has reacted angrily to the Supreme Court's description of the group's submission to the court as blatant falsehood, misinformation, and malicious rumor. CUPP says the court's description of its submissions confirms that there was an unholy alliance between the court and the ruling All Progressives Congress APC. The court has warned the party to stop what it calls was an orchestrated falsehood and campaign of calumny. In response, CUPP warned in a statement by its Publicity Secretary, Ikenga Imo, that the Chief Justice of Nigeria will hear more from them. The statement says the court's pronouncement proved it is not neutral. The group says by its pronouncement, it appears the Supreme Court has already given judgments in its appeal without constituting a panel. CUPP says the court has brought itself to the arena of politics when it used words like orchestrated campaign of calumny. Labor unions have suspended their planned nationwide strike after a meeting with the federal government on Tuesday. It has asked the federal government for more documents on the consequential adjustments on the new national minimum wage. Negotiations continued today. During the meeting on Tuesday, Minister of Labour and Employment Dr. Chris Ngige had told the unions their demand would shut down the economy. Both sides were unable to reach an agreement on the salary adjustment. A source present at the meeting said Labour had lowered its position to 20 and 20%, but the government had increased its offer to only 17% for workers at grade level 7 to 9. 15% for those at levels 10 to 14, and 12% for workers on levels 15 to 17. Nigerian Labour Congress Deputy President Amechi Asuguni told journalists negotiations would continue at today's meeting to discuss critical areas that are still in contest. As the federal government was telling Labour meeting its demands to shut down the nation's economy, Lagos State Governor Babajide Sanwo-Olu was affirming to the state organized labor, Lagos would pay its workers more than the 30 naira national minimum wage. He said the payments would begin once the federal government and labor leaders conclude their negotiations. Sanwo-Olu said his government takes very seriously the issue of minimum wage because of its importance to the well-being of the people. The governor said the state is technically ready to roll out the new minimum wage. He said however little it may be, the state will pay more than 30,000 naira minimum wage. It says this would show the state's appreciation to its workers to acknowledge their contributions to the growth of the state. The rules that govern operations of commercial motorcycles in Lagos State appear to be continually ignored. Designated operational areas are being breached, and the motorcycles, commonly called Okadas, go everywhere they are not supposed to go. So the State Environmental Sanitation and Special Offences Agency Task Force decided to raid certain areas where these rules are blatantly disobeyed. In that sweep, operatives have impounded more than 130 Okada motorcycles plying restricted routes in different areas of the state, including CMS and Yaba. The agency said this action was necessary to restore sanity to Lagos roads and rid the state of defiant motorcyclists. It said among those arrested on Tuesday was one motorcyclist that was riding against traffic. The task force says its clampdown would extend to all areas of Victoria Island, Ajah and Lekki in order to curb illegal operations and plying of restricted routes. Nigerians have taken to various social media platforms on Tuesday to condemn the National Identity Management Commission, which has just announced that renewal of national identity cards would cost 3,000 naira to renew national identity cards. In a tweet, the commission also explained that its main focus was to ensure that all Nigerians are enrolled. NIMC says the money charged would enable it to make the identity cards available at all times. Many citizens reacting on social media described it as a fraudulent means to extort the public. 17 years ago, Susan Olasheni with a master's degree looked for work in Abuja but could only be offered peanuts. She opted for a low capital business that took just a little initiative and creativity. The rest, as they say, is history. Reporter Dej Badmus tells us a thing or two about this enterprising businesswoman.
When it comes to beaded accessories and attires, residents of Abuja know where to go. From coral to glass, pearl, seed, sand, camel bone or vinyl, Susan Olaseni can work magic with them. With painstaking precision, she passes wires into the tiny holes of beads to create beautiful works of art. Susan has a master's degree in business administration and a graduate degree in tourism, but 17 years ago, she decided to make beads for a living when her white-collar job couldn't pay the bills anymore. She started her bead-making enterprise, Prezi Bridal Home.
When I came to Abuja 2007, I came as a graduate. I wanted to come and look for a job. The job I got wasn't really fetching me much money like that. At the end of the day, I have to quit my job to face my bead business, which eventually it was fetching me much more than I could ever think of.
Susan says she has no regrets since she crossed over to full-time entrepreneurship. She says the bead trade is very lucrative because it's cheap to make and in very high demand.
I started with just a bead of 3,000–4,000 naira. After making the bead, a friend of mine saw it and was like, wow, I like this. I would like to buy it for my wife, who is in South Africa. And at the end of the day, I was able to sell it for about 17,000–18,000 naira.
Being a traditional Nigerian art, bead making came easily to Susan. She learned the craft from her mother, who was a professional bead maker. But beyond making a living from it, Susan is using her craft to promote the Nigerian culture and identity.
We come to realize that gold accessories have come to take over our culture, which is not supposed to be. The beauty of our culture, the beauty of Nigeria, is to make sure our traditional still stand.
Susan became a bead maker to survive, but 17 years down the line, she's used her skill to empower over 200 women, teaching them financial freedom through bead making.
Coming up, African stories. Vote counting ongoing in Mozambique's presidential election amid charges of ballot stuffing. And later, international news. Impeachment inquiry. Healthcare. Syria takes center stage at 4th U.S. Democratic presidential debate.
You are watching ANN.
Dear Mommy, you went out that night with the baby in your tummy, but you did not come back. The baby is very fine and she eats and sleeps a lot. Everyone says that you are in a better place, but I miss you so much. I keep asking them, where is the better place, but nobody answers me. Auntie Carrie just hugs me and says, go and play. Mommy, I miss you. Please, when are you coming home?
I still do miss you, Mom. And in honor of your memory, I'm a doctor today working with the MTN Foundation to save mothers and children every day.
Ending mother and child mortality in Nigeria is dear to us. We will keep strengthening this most important bond just for you.
Welcome back. This is ANN News. Now to African stories. On Sunday, even before a winner was declared by the Tunisian Electoral Commission, supporters of Kais Saied had taken over central Tunis, celebrating figures from 2 exit polls that proclaimed their candidate had won by a landslide. Official results have proved that to be true, as Saied has been declared winner of the presidential runoff election in the country. Challenger Nabil Karoui has conceded defeat. Adnan Chawochi has the details.
Tens of thousands of Tunisians took to the streets in the capital city Tunis and across the country to celebrate the victory. Kais Saied pledged to uphold the rule of law and its application to all citizens, including himself. The 61-year-old retired law professor shed light on urgent challenges facing the country. In addition, he noted that relations at home will be based on trust and responsibility.
The law applies to everyone. My role is to enforce it. Tunisia has reached a new stage in its history on the path of democracy, requiring to meet many social and economic challenges. The will of the people equals the level of decision. The state remains standing with its legislation and its international commitments.
Analysts argue that the two candidates in the presidential runoff and their electors must now turn the page and focus on rebuilding a strong state with a stable economy.
The integrity of the elections is an important achievement. There is no loser in the elections. The two candidates and all Tunisians have won. Political stability is the first condition for improving the economic situation, which is a national priority.
The new president campaigned without funding or backing from a structured political party. Exit polls show that 90% of Tunisian youths aged 18 to 25 and 86% of university professors and students voted for Kais Saied in the second presidential election since the 2011 popular uprising.
Meanwhile, Mozambicans are still waiting for the results of yesterday's presidential and parliamentary elections, which they hope would establish badly needed stability and economic growth in their country. As vote counting continues, there are already allegations of ballot stuffing, which the country's electoral commission has debunked. It says those reports are completely untrue. The Electoral Administration Technical Secretariat has also had to refute opposition allegations that an unauthorized private company had brought ballot boxes and voting materials into the country aimed at compromising the election. In the run-up to the elections, sporadic violence broke out in which an election observer was killed. Another person was also killed in attacks by a breakaway group of Renamo fighters. Frelimo has ruled this country of nearly 30 million people for 44 years and has never lost an election. Frelimo overthrew Portuguese colonial powers in 1975. Sudan's new transitional government and rebel leaders have kicked off peace talks in Juba, South Sudan on Monday to find an end to the country's civil wars. The meeting has come after some rebel groups signed a draft agreement in Juba last month, detailing a roadmap for the talks, trust-building measures, and an extension of a ceasefire already in place. Daniel Arapmoy reports.
IGAD heads of state and government are in South Sudan's capital, Juba. They are meeting to push forward a peace process for Khartoum. Ending multiple conflicts in Sudan is a key condition for the country's removal from the United States list of sponsors of terrorists.
No one side to any political conflict can win through the barrel of a gun, but more successfully through political dialogue, negotiation, and compromises.
South Sudan's President Salva Kiir initiated the Sudanese peace talks in July this year. They aim to bring all Sudanese armed opposition groups to the negotiating table with their government after the ousting of former President Omar al-Bashir.
It is my hope that our convening will pave the way for an agreement to emerge between the transitional government and the other parties to the talks.
The civil war in Sudan's Blue Nile and Darfur regions is a key topic as the country attempts to move towards democracy.
We have come to the talks with a firm and a strong will and determination to achieve a new Sudan of freedom, justice and equality.
Some opposition groups say they are yet to agree on who should mediate between the powers to end the war.
First of all, we need peace in the Sudan, so we need to make sure that we reach an agreement. Then we can achieve a democratic rule in the country.
with some opposition groups opposed to Juba being the venue of the negotiations. Sudan's transitional government says peacemaking with rebels is one of its main priorities.
When we return, international news. Impeachment inquiry, healthcare, Syria takes center stage at 4th U.S. Democratic presidential debate. And later, sport. International delegations arrive for the 7th Military World Games in China. Welcome back. This is ANN News. Now to some world events. 12 U.S. Democratic presidential hopefuls tackled issues of healthcare, the economy, foreign policy and the Syrian war in the 4th debate of this election season last night. Presidential contender Elizabeth Warren came under repeated attack on her healthcare and tax policies as moderative rivals pushed her to explain how she would pay for ambitious proposals, including her Medicare for all. The debate comes at a critical time as Biden has seen his one solid lead in opinion polls in the Democratic race diminished by Warren, a leader of the party's progressive movement who has steadily risen over the past 2 months. Warren appeared to be the main target of other presidential contenders who went on the attack against the U.S. senator over her health care and tax plans. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan says he's not worried about U.S. sanctions and the advancement of Russian-backed Syrian forces toward the Turkish border. He also dismissed U.S. calls for a ceasefire in northern Syria. Erdogan says a ceasefire was off the table and declared his country will not sit at the table with those he described as terrorist organizations. The Turkish leader's comments came as Russian-backed Syrian regime troops gained control of the town of Manbij and surrounding areas. Until recently, Manbij was an active U.S. military outpost. Russia had stepped up its role in the Syrian conflict by deploying military police to the country's north, filling a vacuum created by the withdrawal of U.S. troops from the area. Hong Kong leader Carrie Lam was forced to abandon her annual policy speech after opposition lawmakers disrupted the legislative session by jeering her. She later offered no direct olive branch to protesters. The demonstrators are demanding for universal suffrage and an independent inquiry into what they say has been excessive force used by police in dealing with demonstrations. In her policy statement, Lam was unapologetic about her government's response to the protest, which has seen her introduce colonial-era emergency laws. Lam says any acts that advocates Hong Kong's independence and threatens the country's sovereignty, security and development interests will not be tolerated. The protesters are angry at what they see as Beijing's tightening grip on the city, which was guaranteed 50 years of freedoms in the country, in the one country, two systems formula under which it returned to China in 1997. But pro-democracy lawmaker Taya Chan says Lam should resign for failing to address the protesters' 5 core demands. Lam has rejected calls to step down. And China's cultural footprint across Latin America is growing. One sign of that is the expansion of the number of Confucius institutes in the region where local students learn Chinese language and culture. Mandarin is one of 5 major regional languages of China. Although it is based on the Beijing dialect, it is not the same. In this report, Stephen Gibbs tells us how prevalent it is in Venezuela.
Nobody said it was going to be easy. But these Mandarin classes in Venezuela are proving extremely popular. They've been going since 2016.
The Chinese, I think it's more important, inclusive than in English now for Venezuela. I mean, with the Chinese people, it's better to talk with them in Chinese, better than in English or in Spanish.
Have you found it a particularly difficult language to master?
Yes, it's too difficult, the tones, the grammar, but you can do it. If nothing you can not do it if you try.
The course must be around the cheapest in the world, as little as $4 a term, though even that is not nothing for many Venezuelans. And the lessons are thriving despite, or perhaps even because of, the economic crisis here.
There are 800 students currently studying Mandarin at this university, and there's a waiting list for several classes.
Most of the students we spoke to said they wanted to learn because they thought it would help their career opportunities. This man hoped to be a translator for a Chinese construction company.
If you like languages, it's a lot easier.
The project is a joint initiative by the Venezuelan and Chinese governments. So there are two directors, one Venezuelan and one Chinese. They say this is not just about learning to speak Mandarin.
They think that's an opportunity to have another wide scope of the world and another wide scope of getting good jobs, better jobs, okay, if they learn Chinese. And also they admire Chinese people because their country develops so fast. So they are looking at them as an example to follow, okay, so that we can develop in our country the same strategies of change a little bit, but using the same, moral concepts and the hard work and discipline and all that to help our country to develop faster.
Have you found the economic situation here difficult?
It's difficult for the students, and sometimes it's difficult for us to spend their money. I often told my students, I was born in 1960s. In my childhood, the life in China was more difficult than what it is here, okay? But Chinese people never gave up, okay? Working hard, and never gave up changing our fate, because we know, okay, knowledge is the power.
So it's not just a language that's being taught here. It's
still to come, sports. International delegations arrive for the 7th Military World Games in China. Please stay with us. Welcome back. This is ANN News and Sport. The Athletes Village for the 7th Military World Games opened on Friday in host city Wuhan. And this is the first time an Athletes Village has been constructed for the Military World Games, a sport event that has been operated by the International Military Sports Council since it was first held in Rome in 1995. 10,000 athletes from more than 100 countries are expected at the Games.
It's an official welcome for the first batch of guest teams at the 7th Military World Games. Flags of 5 countries were raised on Tuesday afternoon: Algeria, Germany, France, Guyana, and Norway. Member countries are bringing the very best sportsmen and women from the Army, Navy, Air Forces, and military police.
So we bring with us 402 guys with very good athletes. So our expectations are high. In fact, as you know, China is receiving us, so we expect to make friends with China and all the other 108 countries participating in this 7th game.
The Wuhan Games are playing host to 10,000 athletes, coaches, medical personnel, and officials from over 100 countries. Opening day is on the 18th of October, and those who have arrived are getting used to the time difference, climate, and culture.
First time in China at all, and my expectations, basically that those games are fair for everyone and that we can have friendship through sports, and I get to know other nations, how their performances. I'm really interested in how good they are, and learn more about their culture.
For everybody taking part in the games or the competitions, fighting at each other, but after that they come together, speak, have fun, laughing together, and that's, I think, the most important thing at this.
Flags raising ceremonies will continue to be held to welcome international delegations. By the time the games begin, there will be over 100 flags, including China's, at this square in the Athletes Village. Military athletes come to compete with a sense of pride and for the honor of their country. But beyond that, many come to build friendships and have a good time, which is really the core of the Games.
That is ANN News this evening. Thank you for joining us. For details on these and other breaking stories, visit our website, annafrica.news. Conversation continues on our social media platforms, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at ANN Africa TV.